We are diving deeper in a concept that we brought up in Yoo-Hoo, specifically with the Enneagram, for the biblical character that relates or resonates with this Enneagram 4 personality type is the young man named Joseph. The young man named Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph is known as a dreamer. Let's lean into that today. Genesis 37 says, here is the history of Jacob. And then when Joseph was 17 years old, he used to pasture the flock with his brothers, even though he was still a boy. Once, when he was with the sons, his brothers, in essence, his father's wives' sons, he brought a bad report about them to their father. And then after that, Jacob had a concern for his son, Joseph, because his other brothers didn't necessarily care for them. Now, Joseph was a dreamer, as you know, most likely. And what he ended up doing is he had a few of these dreams, and he had these pretty magnificent dreams. And one was about a bundle of wheat in the field, and then suddenly one stood up and the other ones fell down to the ground. And he interpreted it as if his brothers and his family would serve him. And then he had another dream, and that dream was in verse 9. It says, the sun and the moon, 11 stars prostrating themselves before me. And his father at this point, man, got a little angry and began to rebuke him and said, man, what is this dream? And man, don't be telling your brothers. Don't tell your mother, and to be honest, don't even tell me. But then it says in Scripture, interesting enough, but his father kept the matter in the mind. I think what's interesting about this reference in the story about Joseph is that his father honestly favored him most and gave him this coat of many colors. And the Enneagram 4 is known for their desire to be different, their desire to have this individual approach to life, to stand out. And Joseph did, man, not only with what he wore, but what and how he thought, the way he interacted with individuals, and what ended up happening, because I believe Joseph was wired to be different, is he vocalized that. He lived that out. He had this different approach to life. And interesting enough, he was going to go bring his brothers to some food. And when he came to where they were at, they decided to kill him. They decided to go ahead and dispose of him. But one of the brothers stood up and said, no, that is not right. Let's fake his death. And so at this point, Joseph was stripped from his robe. They killed an animal, spilt the blood on that robe, interesting enough, and then threw him into the pit and was sold to slavery. There's another story that sounds pretty familiar with that, with some of those details. That's the story of Jesus. Jesus, who was stripped of his robe, that the blood was spilt, and also he was thrown into the pit of despair. But what's awesome about the story of Joseph and the story of Jesus is the pit of destruction is not where it ends. But in essence, it's kind of where it begins. That God has this redemptive story, not only for an Enneagram 4, but also for the son and the daughters of God. And I think it's absolutely amazing that we are called to be different. There's some scriptures that call us to be peculiar people, different, people who stand out. And that's who we are to be as we follow Jesus. That God calls us to be holy and set apart. And so Enneagram 4 is Enneagram 2, Enneagram 3, heart-driven people. And to be honest, the whole spectrum. You are to be different. Not different in the way that you want to be, but different in the way that God calls you to be. So lean into that today.